Hello, I'm Dr. Basil Considine, and today we're going to be talking about how to craft a book review. Now, book reviews are a important genre of scholarship, and you have commercial publications such as the New York Review of Books. You have book review sections in newspapers. You have many, many websites that have book reviews of all sorts about scholarly books, about fiction, television, and many other things. And when I say television, I do mean that because television has become a book medium in a new way, abetted by advances in digital storytelling. And so, what originally was confined to just the printed page is now something that is expanded in podcasts, on the air cable, various online storytelling things, and more. So enhanced media, what comes is no longer restricted just to the printed page, and you will have book reviews being given on all these different media types as well. So let's talk a little bit more about what a book review is. And as we delve into this question, we're going to start by looking at an assignment from a ACU course that happens to guide readers through the process of writing a book review. And then we are going to look at some book review guidelines from a journal that you could submit to, that perhaps if you're writing this assignment with a future publication in mind, you might be specifically planning to do for that or another journal, and use that as a lens to understand the assignment better. So let's take a look at this assignment, and this is coming from the Global Leadership Leading in a Diverse Context course. This is something with the ever-increasing globalization of the world and the diversification of the global workforce in different places. This is something where understanding how to get different groups of people to work well with you and work well with others is going to be an ongoing, evolving thing. So definitely an important topic in this day and age. So we're looking at the guided book review assignment from week 3. Now, we could just briefly screenshot this and look at it. That's a lot of text. We're going to break it down in different sections. So we can separate the instructions for this in part into a preamble that's introducing the assignment and what you'll be doing in the spirit of it. And so we have this note that the paper should be 4 to 6 pages, which if you're using our APA course paper template, 12-point font, 1-inch margins, double spacing, that's going to be roughly 4 to 6 pages. But that works out to 1,000 to 1,500 words, because in APA style, using all those things I just said, it's going to be roughly 250 words per page. And so 4 times 250 is 1,000, 6 times 250 is 1,500, 1,000 to 1,500 words in length. Typed, of course, double spaced, 12-point font, as they say. The paper will be written in academic writing, third person, and we'll use the APA style guide for reference. Now, that third person is an important thing. There are journals at solicit book reviews that invite you to bring in the first person, but in my experience, those tend to be on the minority. There are some examples in education, for example, where the author is encouraged to foreground their particular situation because readers of this want to know if someone in a similar situation will find it as useful. But usually it's more dispassionately, a little bit more indirect, and so the use of third person is encouraged. Okay, due to the academic nature of this course, the book review will not read like a professional book review. In that case, we're talking about more publications where authors are paid to do that. So think newspapers, think uh, the kind of thing that you might encounter in a magazine, perhaps. Rather, this assignment seeks to expand the literature knowledge and should subsequently summarize and synthesize key points so well that one could understand the book without reading it. And this is actually pointing at a strategy that many people use in graduate school, where they're asked to assess books, and they will read the reviews first and use that to get an interview. Sorry, to get an overview of what the book is about. Whether they go on to read the whole thing, well, that depends on the class and depends on the student. But often when people are trying to make sense of a larger body of literature, they'll go ahead and read reviews and then use that perhaps as the lens for some careful guided reading when they don't have time to do the whole thing. And indeed, this particular assignment comes with what they describe as a general guide for what to include in your book review. And so let's take a look and see what's in there. Well, we have introduced the book being reviewed with its author, title, and main idea. A short description about the author and their relevance in the field, like have they practiced in this? Are they well respected doing something? 4 to 6 sentences on the context of the book. When was it written? Obviously, if you're writing about, say, educational reform in the United States, how recent that is and whether it covers major developments in the field, that is something of great potential importance. What was going on in the world to cause this book to be written? That could be rephrased as, why was this needed, or why was this important? Why was this timely? Now, it might be something that you're saying, well, just, it's cool. Sure. But often the pitch to a publisher, the pitch to an audience involves some measure of, oh, and for people who are interested or need this, this is doing something that was not previously available. And that could very well involve responding to a specific need. And then that fifth one, what is your take on the book, the framework? How does it approach things? Does that work for you, perhaps? And then we have content summary. Okay, isolate, describe the book's thesis, figure out what the major points are, or what some of the major points that are relevant to whatever your interest, and this may vary by the journal you're writing for. But compile a list of 3 to 5 main takeaways or major quotes from the book and elaborate on the importance of these points. Fair enough. Summarize the book in 1 to 2 pages. Okay, again, that's going to be 250 to 500 words, which if we look at the overall length here, that's a fair portion of this. So this comes to another thing about book reviews for people who are deciding whether they want to purchase the book, having a good idea of the big picture points and whether they want to see the elaboration, to see the support, to see that narrative. If they like what they see in the summarized in the review, that is a powerful incentive to go and borrow, check out, or buy the book. Now, as for the argument, this is where you start looking at the substance of it and what makes it work or not work. I'm reminded of a book review that I read of a book that I had purchased for my own research. And the review said something that I had been thinking about all the time that I've been reading it. Like, is this really that important? And it was a biographical study of a family of musicians. And I could see that there was some interesting that happened, but the presentation and the introduction made it sound like this was an epic journey. And afterwards, I thought, well, that was kind of disappointing. And so I went and read a book review, which is another way that people interface with it. People often will read reviews of theatrical shows they've seen, concerts they've viewed, movies that they've watched, because their friends or not enough of their friends saw it, and so they want to have a dialogue in their thoughts at least, and so they seek out a review to read it. And so you get to see someone else's take on this, as I did when I was reading that myself. So deconstruct the book. Is it interesting, memorable, redundant, instinctive? Why? I remember reading a book that I thought, well, that was an okay book, but everything was said so much better in this other book that I read, and I didn't learn anything new. That would be redundant. On the other hand, I remember reading a book. This is about a musician during the French Revolution, and they just kept on happening that were so cool. I just kept on reading. It was, did it add a whole lot to the understanding of what was going on in the big picture? No. Did it give a really vivid sense of what it was like to be caught in a revolution where they started chopping people's heads off? Yeah, it was really memorable and really interesting. And if that's something that you feel when you're reading the book and assessing what the author has created, by all means, this is the point to talk about it. Now, for this particular genre of this assignment, it asks the question of how does the book fit into leadership and cultural timeline, which is a great way of contextualizing and saying, well, does this represent the latest ideas? Is this kind of in the middle? Is it dated? Does it represent perhaps part of a culture shift or a conservative pre-shift thing? That may have a lot to do with whether the ideas are relevant to one's institution or one's practice. There are institutions that are deliberately on the front and those that are deliberately more conservative. And we're kind of in a uh, cultural debate as a society about some directions that have been in leadership, and that is certainly an exciting thing in an election year. All right, number 3. Was this the same information others authors said, just in a new title, as in a new book? Or was this innovative thinking? Now, innovation can come in many ways. It's not just coming up with the basic ideas, but also how it is applied to different contexts. So something may be innovative in a sense that it hasn't been applied to a particular context, which could be a culture, could be an industry, it could be a group of people, a sub-community. And so that was this person ahead of their time or late to the game? That's a separate question from, is it redundant? Because you might have something where it's not novel, but it's eminently practical. There are lots of articles, books, and other things that are just really long-winded, and you're looking for, okay, here's a practical guide for how to make it happen. So pointing about that something is later to the game in terms of ideas is not necessarily bad if the reason that this book exists or the reason that it is recommended is, hey, here's a concise practical guide for people doing this thing. Now, it's number 4 is very important because it's asking you to not just make your statements about the values you're assigning to this book, but to support it with the examples that include outside sources, bringing in sources from other relevant authors or researchers. And the list of things that go in there continues. How does the book fit with your understanding of leadership and culture? Did you learn new things? Does this feel resonant? Does it feel like it conflicts? Does it go in a completely different direction? What were the author's main objectives in writing the book? And were they successful at whatever they're trying to convince you of, which is generally that these things are important, these things are helpful, you should buy this book and recommend it for other people doing the things. And what possibilities or issues does the book suggest? Now, I recall a book on leadership that I read around 2008. And 2008 is really the start of what we now call the Great Recession. And the book was basically talking about bold strategies for nonprofits. And it suggested trying to get away from a conservative model of trying to support a cash fund or a healthy endowment and saying, spend down, do projects. The organization is not there to perpetuate itself, usually. The organization is there to do great work, whatever that mission is. And what possibilities or issues does the book neglect? Well, this is an interesting thing for when you're looking back at something that was published a year or 2 or 3 ago. And if we were to look a couple years back, we could see the collapse of cryptocurrency in many, many areas, in particular cryptocurrency exchanges. This is something that a lot of people were saying would be the big thing and saying, oh, invest in it. And it turned out to be a bubble for a lot of people who lost a lot of money. And that possibility of collapse is not something that many of the books that were promoting it's were suggesting. Going back to nonprofits, the idea was that the bull gamble would inspire people to get involved and support the organization in new ways, and that even if it only ran for, say, 10 more years, that it would do so really nice. Well, something that book did not really uh, delve into is something that has played out many times in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic, where a lot of arts organizations have been doing what we call sunsetting, where the founders or the group of leadership who are now managing the organization say, you know what, it's been a good run. Let's let's not do this anymore. And that's something that the book that I read didn't really take into account. That this kind of brinksmanship that they've were endorsing with this aggressive, let's live dangerously as a nonprofit, it led to many people just getting burnt out and then shutting down the organization. Now, 10 is, even though you're writing in a third person, it's giving your opinion, which you're going to be backing up. And that can be phrased as, this is a very useful book for X people because these reasons. So an objective way of phrasing what you have uh, gleaned from this in terms of your professional opinion. And it could be, this is useful things. The manner does not work for me or is not recommended for people who are insert things here. I've read something that was that was advertised as a manual for business founders, and it was clearly written for people who had an MBA background, just a way that it used terms and then to explain things. And I thought, well, for someone who didn't go to an MBA program, this is probably not going to be super helpful. And well, that is your professional opinion, and you want to back that up. And then conclusion, we were asked to tie things together, going back to the summary and the argument. So the argument is that big section there. The summary is, what is this book doing? What does it say? Big picture takeaways and the more detailed summary that you provide. So we're going back to that and okay, so what is this book about? Who's the audience for this? And that who's the audience is probably something that, if it hasn't been part of your argument, should definitely be part of the conclusion. And if we look at the rubric for this, it is weighting very heavily, having the specific elements that are listed there. So definitely you'd want to copy and paste this into your document and use the instructions as an outline. And even though you're not going to be numbering the different prompts with your responses, having them there as a list to make sure that you do everything, really helpful. Okay, I do want to call attention to one thing here that is an important bit. So you're being graded in part on inspiring the reader to want to delve deeper, to want to know more about the work that you have reviewed and its content. And that includes pointing out the things that are relevant to whatever audience you have chosen as your target audience. All right. Now let's take that and let's look at a book review call, a set of guidelines for book reviews from a published journal. And these are coming from the Springer website, which I think we can take a quick peek at. So most people who write their first book review look first for a work that they have read already, that they have some familiarity with. You can also look for the kinds of things that you are doing and do a search like leadership journal book reviews. But we're looking at Quality and Quantity, the International Journal of Methodology, which is a somewhat open multidisciplinary journal. And if we look at their call here, they say that they want it to be representative of the diversity and specialization within their discipline. It happens that this is more about uh, how to collect, analyze, make sense of data. And that's fine because what we're looking to do is identify the common themes here. And we see that there are some remarks here, just as we did with the assignment. The book reviews serve the purpose of providing a critical, comprehensive, and concise review of publications with respect to, and then they list their specific interests. and that the section, the book review section, should enable the readers of the journal to gauge the extent to which a particular book will be beneficial to them relative to the time, effort, and costs of acquiring and reading it. Basically, uh, for people who are in this field, subscribing to the journal or reading it through a subscribing institution like a library or a school, all right, you read the book review and you want to come away knowing, is this something relevant to me? Will it be worth my going to read it, putting in the time and trouble to understand it, the cost with time or money of getting it? And I think that is a great way to approach reading a book review and writing one, to ask the question, you know, how is this relevant to me? Will this be a good use of my time? And if we take a look back at these instructions here for the assignment, we have this expand the literature knowledge and subsequently summarize and synthesize key points so that one could understand the book without reading it. That is paralleling what we were just looking at. So let's take a look back at our slide deck now. And I've broken this into a similar set of instructions. So the overview, we read through that, calling to mind again that purpose of providing a critical, comprehensive, and concise review of publications related to what they're doing. And then we have a list of some of the sample fields that they are interested in getting contributions from. So this is defining their scope of interest, as most journals do. Scholars and researchers in sociology, psychology, communication, political science, mathematics, statistics, and other areas. So they list some of the probably frequent hitters and also mention, hey, other things that are also about research that seem compatible with this, we are open to that. So scholars and researchers in these fields who are interested in the methodologies used in the study of social science, which, by the way, includes a lot of leadership studies, are welcome to submit book reviews to Q&Q. Book reviews are either solicited by the editor, meaning that they reach out to people they know, or may be offered unsolicited by prospective reviewers. They also take submissions. Calls for book reviews related to a specific theme issue. So many journals will have themed issues. Usually it'll be once or twice a year, depending on their publication and schedule. It might be they have a specific editor, a specific event, a specific timely theme. Calls for book reviews related to a specific theme issue will be constantly updated on the site. General reviews are welcome at all times. So you don't have to wait till they have a themed issue that aligns with your thing. You can submit something that aligns with that earlier call of things related to research methodologies in the social sciences. Books should be related in some way to the scholarly analysis and critique of research methodologies. All right, that sounds very on brand for this journal. The book must be a publication since 2018, so they're defining reasonably recent as the last 5 or 6 years, and appeal to an international readership. All right, well, if we're talking about research techniques and methodologies, yeah, most of that should be broadly applicable. And then we have the more specifics. The book review should be 1,000 to 1,500 words in length and include a number of aspects, a brief summary of the book's information, including author, editors, names, title of the book, year of publication, name of publisher, total page number, and price. All right, now, how much of this exact information is displayed often depends on the journal. There's some that do include the price, some don't, because the price you end up paying can be so variable, but often they will include the list price, the manufacturer's recommended price, a concise overview of the primary themes, critical analysis, including significance to scholarship and practice, with some details on how it's going to be done, and references. All right, that's a fair bit of stuff. So let's compare. On the left, we have the book review assignment, and I've highlighted some things here. And on the left, you can see the book review assignment. On the right, you can see excerpts from the call for book reviews from this journal where I've highlighted parallel things. And one thing you should notice right away is that if we convert the pages to words on the left, we end up with something that is more or less identical to what this book review is calling for. And that's in part because if you're going to be summarizing a published book on leadership, you're probably going to need some volume of space to do that. Say 1 to 2 pages as enumerated in the assignment guidelines, and that will work out to around 250 to 500 words, which measuring that as a quarter to a third of the book review, that sounds about right with a lot of the reviews I've read. And then I've highlighted some of the other concordances that you'll see. Author, title, okay, simply enough. Who wrote it and how do I find it? And then notably, the instructions on the left say specifically to introduce the author and their relevance to the field. But after that, we have context of the book, which and the thesis. And we might make an analogy to what the instructions of the writer saying, a concise overview of the book's primary themes. What is this telling us? And that could overlap directly with the takeaways, or it could also be about the, what is this responding to? If we look at this next part, the deconstruct the book, that is a critical analysis. And how much space you spend on that specifically versus having your analysis filtered into the other ones, depends on your structure and how strictly the order is important to the target journal. Some it is, some there's more flexibility. The blue, I think, is really important. How does this fit into the leadership and cultural timeline? Or, as enumerated on the right, evaluating the strengths and weaknesses and relevance to the field. Is this pushing things forward? Is it calling for a retreat? Is it a conservative middle road that most people will agree on? Tell us how this fits into things. And that comparison of others' works, that's something you can write very concisely, as you see on the right. But also you can understand that as a more detailed list of here's some ways to do that, which we have illustrated on the left in green. And something I want to point out is that references are actually something that you can use as part of a book review. Now, I will say that the New York Times review of books, they often will hire leading authors in the field who write wide-ranging essays that are practically scholarly journal articles in their own right, and some that are much more focused on the work. But that doesn't stop you from citing other work, especially if you feel that something says better or worse, or that it's following up on something, or that it's presenting ideas that originated somewhere else, for better or worse. And if we look at that, successful in convincing the reader, what possibilities does that suggest that I've highlighted on the bottom? That corresponds to that critical analysis. It's another way of approaching that. And that analysis of its significance includes what it proposes and what it leaves out. There's a saying that no one can do all things well and quickly and cheaply. And, with every book, there's a limit to how many pages can go into it and that you can convince readers to read. And with this, we have that question of, for whatever purpose you have identified as the purpose of this book, that perhaps the author has identified and you may or may not agree with, or you might be applying it to somewhere else, that what is it bringing? What's it leaving out? How does this change how we feel about it? That's pretty important. Now, how to bind things together. So I'll note that in the guidelines on the right, we have this all lumped together under a critical analysis. So whatever you're presenting as the critical analysis that you make in that term, we do come back to this point here, what your overall opinion is. Are you recommending this? Are you not? And then for the purpose of the assignment, you're tying this together with kind of a recap of what this has. And I think it's important to remember that the reader of the book review is approaching this information differently than when you first presented it. You don't want to have the exact same sentences here, but you'll be revisiting it often briefly because you're reminding them of that ground you covered now that they've seen the more detailed summary and your critical commentary. And now they are at the best point to make an informed decision about whether this book matters to them, whether this is something that they might seek out. And that is a really good thing to have in a critical analysis. There are people who read book reviews because they want to know what's out there. But a lot of the people, myself included, also read book reviews with the goal of, hey, is this something I want to make room in my life, in my head, in my teaching or pleasure? And it might not be something that you use directly yourself, but if you're, say, a professor, a classroom instructor, and someone asks for something, if you've read about it in a book review and you're like, oh, hold on, I know something that I think might be helpful for that. That is a great piece of critical analysis to be able to leave after you've read the review. That's all the time we have today. So you're more than welcome to visit the Online Writing Center website where we explore many different topics, including APA. We have a variety of recommended resources, including the APA style website, in case you're wondering how to go about citing the sources that you are referencing in your book review. If you are tracking a lot of sources and this review happens to be part of your preparation for, say, a master's thesis or doctoral dissertation or something similar, you might be interested in that Zotero webinar for tracking your sources and quotations and keeping those neatly managed with minimal manual copy and pasting. And if you have any other questions about writing or other topics, feel free to email onlinewritingcenter@acu.edu. To go to my.acu.edu, select Academic Resources Online Writing Center and follow the instructions for an appointment. And with that, I'm going to bid you good night.